Perfect. So excited to have you with us, Richard. This is going to be a great conversation. So I'm going to ask everyone just at the top of the recording, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself until we're ready to open it up for audience Q&A. I'd appreciate that. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, Alison Griffin. I'm a senior vice president with Whiteboard Advisors. We are a social impact agency that largely works at the intersection of entrepreneurship and innovation, new ideas, and public policy. And we do that work across the education space, from early childhood education through to K-12 to post-secondary education and on to workforce development. And I have the great pleasure of co-leading our post-secondary education practice. Coming to you live from Boulder, Colorado. Even though our firm is based in Washington, D.C., we are probably like many of you now operating from all spheres of the country and the globe. And this book talk actually started during the pandemic. Like much of our virtual content, but it's one thing that has stayed on, I guess, as we perhaps transition out of this pandemic environment. We've been able to bring authors and contributors together with the audiences who read their work and have a conversation directly with the author about their book, about their written word, about some of the things that they're seeing and hearing, and then give space to an audience to engage directly with the author and ask questions and also share experience and thoughts. And so today, we are so fortunate to be joined by Richard Culatta. Richard is the author of Digital for Good, Raising Kids to Thrive in an Online World. Richard is also the CEO of the International Society for Technology and Education, or ISTE, ISTE. And we'll talk a little bit about Richard's work with ISTE. We're going to talk about the book. And frankly, we're going to all unite around this idea of the refrain, please get off your screen. I think those of us who are parents or educators of young people, that may be the sentiment that brought us here. But I think that once we leave this conversation today, we may be thinking about the power of technology through a very different lens. And so, Richard, I'm excited to have you share your thoughts with us. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a great to be here, and what a fun way to spend a little time over lunch is talking about important stuff. So this is good.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing your time with us. I will also just level set for the audience. If you wouldn't mind putting your questions in the chat, I'm going to use your comments and reflections, weave those into our conversation for the first half of the book talk with Richard. And then for the second half of the conversation, I'll pull from some of your sentiments and we can ask questions directly. So thank you. So maybe just to level set, Richard, I know we're going to spend a majority of our time talking about the book, but I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit better. Can you talk a bit about yourself and your experience, particularly in the scope of education and technology? What brought you to ISTE and this role you hold now? Give us a sense of who you are.
Sure, happy to. So I started long ago in education as an educator. I was a high school Spanish teacher for a very brief time, and then went on to work in teacher prep and preparing new teachers. So I always have this passion for educator preparation, which is something we don't spend nearly enough time talking about, by the way. I know that's not really our topic for today, but man, that is an area that we all need to be talking more about. And that's actually where I learned about ISTE. I joined, I became an ISTE member through a set of interesting experiences. I had a chance to come work for the federal government. I worked a bit in the intelligence community and then in the US Senate, and then was appointed by President Obama to lead education technology initiatives for the country. Did that for a bit, went to my home state of Rhode Island as the Chief Innovation Officer. I grew up in Rhode Island, and it was very fun to have a chance to go back and serve again. there, and work on issues beyond just education, looking at issues of how does government just serve, what is it? My real role was, what would it look like to improve the user experience of government? I mean, that's truly what it came down to. So I was sort of like the first chief user experience officer for a state. That was a little too, fuzzy of language to put on my title. So we went with chief innovation officer. Anyway, after that, I had a chance to come down and take over as the CEO of ISTE, a group that I continued to stay involved with. I love what ISTE does. If you're not familiar with ISTE, our job is to help infuse and accelerate innovation in education. That's what we do. We look at using technology as a catalyst for innovation, but really the end goal is not about technology adoption. It's about how do we make awesome things happen faster in learning. So that's it. Now, the one other part that I'll just share that's probably important, Alison, if people don't know this, I have 4 kids. We survived the pandemic, as all of you did. We were certainly lucky in the sense that we had some resources and some family supports that other people did not have during COVID. But even for us, it was a very stressful time. And something that became really clear to me was, as we have shifted to having a lot more technology being used by our kids and in our families, we have not done nearly enough to help create healthy culture around that technology. And so it was as much as it's any of my background in education, the reason I ended up writing this book was truly because I had 4 kids and our tech culture in our home was not right. And as I was turning to look for advice, I was getting advice that really wasn't helpful. We can talk more about that later. And that was sort of a catalyst to actually to write a book about it. So there you go. That's me.
I love it. You have a fascinating background. I feel like we could have a book talk or a podcast series on the whole host of roles that you have held over your career. But thank you for sharing that part of your background with us. I resonated with your reflection on, someone who was resourced and had family support and sort of all these things, and feel incredibly fortunate for that. But I also felt the pull of how unbelievably difficult it was. And I think a lot of us felt that and probably started to relate to families and community members who have had that experience for decades that preceded the pandemic. And so for once, I felt connected in a very different way to people in my community who were struggling with situations that perhaps had not been my experience. And I think it's changed my perspective. And it sounds like you've had a similar experience. So I want to kick us off, and I said this a little sort of jokingly at the introduction, but I feel like many of us joining today are either parents or we're working directly with learners of all ages. I see some colleagues who have joined us from the post-secondary realm, and I'm certain that the single thing that does unite us is this refrain of like, please get off your device. Please, turn off your device for 5 minutes. And in the book, you actually talk about issues such as screen time and online safety, and you offer some advice and recommendations for parents and educators. But as we start on a new school year, I know some of us have not yet started, some of us have been in school for a while. What good guidance do you have for us all? What can you share?
There's lots of, how long do we have? That was quite a question to get started
I
with.
know it's loaded, but thank you.
Good guidance. Yeah. I mean, look, one of the things I'll just start, the foundational thing that I'll say is, before we get into any of the nitty gritty on what do we, what tools do we use? What apps do we use? How do we use technology? We need to pause and spend a minute deciding what our digital culture should be in our home. And that's the foundation, the step that we often skip. And so I think it's just taking a minute and saying, and this is a great question to have with your kids. Like, it's not something you do to your kids. And if we're talking about in classrooms, it's the same thing. It's something we have with our students, especially with older kids. And I think a good starter question is, what type of people do we want to be in the digital world? What do we want to be known for? What are the types of things in the physical world? We're known for things. We're known for certain actions, for certain things that we do, for certain activities that we participate in, for things that we don't participate in, for things that we think are funny, for things that we don't think are funny. And so it's those questions. What does that look like in the virtual world? And I think if we can define some of those, then some of the next steps become a little bit easier. I always recommend actually writing this down. Just capture, we suggest, and actually in my book, I share the one that we use in our family, which is a sort of a guide. It's device use guide policy. If you were in school, we'd call it a policy. In a home, we'd probably call it a norms, right? But it just lays out what are some things what are we about? And I always frame this. We'll talk hopefully more about this. I always frame this as a positive. It's not a list of don'ts. It's not all the things not to do. It's here are what we expect you to do. In virtual spaces, we expect in our family, we use technology to help us be curious and learn new things. We use technology to make our family and the world around us a better place. This is one that's actually on mine, and this is right off of mine. So I'm one of those guys. I go on vacation. I have a great time, great vacation. I don't take a single picture. It's the last thing that I think of. And then we end up this whole vacation. I've never taken a single picture because it's just not, it just doesn't cross my mind. So one of the things that we include in our family cultures that are for our kids, one of their responsibilities is to help curate family memories through the use of their technology, right? And that's just one of our norms. And so we have these great images and pictures, and it doesn't always have to be pictures. In our case, we put a little notepad app on everybody's device, and they'll capture funny things that somebody said. Our kids are always saying crazy things, right? But you forget them. And so our kids, we write them down. And then at the end of the year, we have a tradition that we take the best of and we turn them into a Christmas card, right? Yes. And so whatever those things are, those are the norms. And it's really critical when you talk about those norms that they also include what happens if something goes wrong. And so often it's, a statement that we know in virtual spaces, just like in physical spaces, we will make mistakes. We'll do things that we regret. We'll do things that aren't responsible. When that happens, what do we do about it? And in our case, it says, come and talk to a parent and we'll help make it right. You see that? So it's a positive experience because we want our kids to learn the best thing they can do is come to us to get help resolving something that went wrong online. If we do anything that sends them in any other direction, that scares them from coming to us, that makes it feel like they don't want to do it, we have actually set ourselves up for a much higher risk down the road. So that is my base. If I had to pick one thing, and there's a bunch of other examples I can give, but if I had to pick one thing, it would be that. Set the culture and write it down and review it periodically on what the norms are of your digital family culture.
I love that. And I think that's something that's so practical for all of us, both in our family environments, but perhaps in environments with children or learners that we're engaging with in other ways, community organizations, schools, certainly. And we'll talk a little bit about the role of our educators. But there's, something you said about students, or I'm sorry, your students, your children, capturing those memories. And when my boys were born, so they're 13 and 15 now. So think back, 15 years ago, it was suggested to me to set up an email address for them. And the thing I did is I put that on my phone, and every time they said something funny, I would send them an email. And so now I have, I'll admit it, 15 years or 13 years of emails of funny things they said or did. And to your point, it's so fun to go back and look at those and reflect on them as a family. Yeah. The other thing that you just mentioned is creating an environment where learners feel safe, coming to a parent or to an educator, identifying that adult you can trust to have a difficult conversation when something goes wrong. Sometimes, right, that is the environment that we're creating in our homes, but it's also the environment we can create in our schools. And so I think about, many educators are now finding themselves supporting a new generation of digital natives. Yeah. And, some of our educators are actually some of the very first digital natives, right, as generations have moved forward. So what do we do to bridge the gap across generations? Today's learners, educators, parents, guardians. What are some guiding principles for working with our entire learning ecosystem?
That's a really interesting question. And I don't know that I've had anybody ask me that question before. So, I think one of the things that I would share about that is, so first of all, we often, and this is largely in the work that we do in schools, we often conflate tech fluency with effective tech use. And I can promise you they are not the same thing. We have a lot of young educators, early educators that are very tech, fluent, very, comfortable,
Savvy,
and
kind of.
are actually not very effective at using technology in ways that really helps from a learning standpoint.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that we see when we work with schools is that often it is the more experienced teachers, I won't say older, the experienced teachers that may be a little bit clunkier around the use of technology, but with a little bit of help can figure that out and then actually use technology in much more powerful ways. So that's the first thing, is just a reminder that there's not to conflate those two things of sort of tech. Often the best ideas for how to implement using tech for learning, digital tools for learning, actually come from people who may be less tech savvy, if we want to use that word. That's part of why I just really bristle at the whole digital natives thing. That's language
Oh,
that
there.
is not helpful for us.
Okay.
So that's one thing. The other thing that I think is really important, though, is to experience for those of us who are in a generation one or two above our students, to experience what their world is like. I don't think we spend nearly enough time just going on sort of digital field trips with young people. There's so much, we always want to tell them how to do it and be their mentor, and we don't understand enough about how to do that, to be giving advice. And I think we need to just spend some time, do this. If you have your kids or students, just say, hey, take me on a tour around your world. What sites do you particularly like? What are things that are interesting? Who do you follow? This is a great question to ask this. Who are the people that you follow on social media, whether it's Instagram or TikTok or whatever, YouTube, if the YouTubers, learning. If you don't know who Mr. Beast is, you should not be giving advice to anybody on how to be using video, right? If you don't know who Zach King is, you shouldn't be. And it's not that these are great necessarily role models. They're certainly creative, but there's just a context on how they think about use of technology that we need to understand before we sort of think we know how to give all the right advice. If you have kids, sort of younger kids, and you haven't explored Minecraft and don't know what it looks like to be part of Minecraft, before you give any advice, take a tour, right? Take a tour on what that my name is Jessica, right? I mean, it's just one of those things, and it just gives context for how these things are. So I think we need to spend a lot more time asking young people to take us with them on a journey. And in order to have the trust for them, they have to know that we're not going to immediately start to boss them around in an environment that we don't even understand yet. And I think it leads to some great conversations, and I'm blown away by the amount of creativity that I see in virtual spaces. There's some junk there too, right? Obviously we know that, we need to watch out for that, but man, it is so creative what young people do on these tools.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and I would, yes, I have experienced that. I've not done the digital tour. I love that idea. I know what I might be doing this weekend with my teenagers. But the idea of how our young people are also leveraging what they know about technology to contribute in the learning space. I've seen some of the presentations that my kids have come up with and frequently say, hey, can you take my stale PowerPoint and do something really cool with it? Like you just showed me that you did for your class.
Sure.
And so like without endorsing a specific tool or product, can you talk a little bit about what families and educators should be looking for in applications and tools that are designed, both for education and fun purposes, but do you have any advice on what they should be really considering or looking for?
That's a great question. So, one second, because I want to actually search something here.
Great.
Okay, great. I just found it. I'm actually going to share my screen for just a second. And it might be weird for a minute while I tee it up. Yeah, sorry, you're seeing a part of my screen. There, hopefully you can see this. So this is actually a part of the book. This is part of Digital for Good. And I write this section. Let me get rid of these weird highlights here. It's because I was searching for something. Okay, so that's what I want. Okay, so what I do is I have a series of questions that I recommend asking when deciding whether an app should be put on a kid's device or not. And this is important. The question is not you shouldn't be asking it, it's your kid that should be asking it, right? But you'll have to obviously facilitate that. And so here are some of them, and I love these. How does the app connect me to other people? Knowing that is really about, I think it's really powerful, especially in education contexts, apps that connect people to each other. Apps that, presenting content is the least interesting thing we can do with technology in education, even though it's like 90% of what we do, PowerPoints, whatever, least interesting thing we do. The most interesting thing we can do with technology in education is connect other people, other peers, experts from around the world. It's fascinating. But when you connect with other people, there is inherent risk and danger in that. And so you need to check on that. So that's one question. How does an app connect me to other people? A second one that I think is really important to ask, which we don't ask enough, how does the app make money? Every app has to be paid for somehow. There are no free lunches in the digital world. It either is paid for by a grant from an organization that we trust. Okay, cool. It's paid for by the fact that you have to pay up front. It costs a certain amount, or there's a recurring subscription, or it's paid for by a whole bunch of advertisement. And that is payment. You are paying in advertisement, right? You're paying by the influence that you're getting from those ads. Either one of any of those can be appropriate depending on what the app is providing in return, but it better not be a mystery. You better know what how the app is making money. Then two more that I'll share. How does the app keep me engaged? Is it because the app has quality content and it's interesting, curiosity building content, or is it playing tricks? Is it doing something like streaks and points, and it's getting me to stay involved because I don't want to lose the points or things like that, right? And then the last one, which is important to look at, is how does the app handle privacy? What information does it require from me? I am not saying, I hope you hear this, I'm not saying that we should never share any of our private information. Of course we should at some point. If it gets us real value, we do it all the time. But it better be information that we are aware that we're sharing and that we're okay to be sharing, and that the return on that information, the return on that investment of our information is of equivalent value. So if you have a really, junky app that doesn't do much and it's sucking a whole bunch of my personal information and then using it for advertising purposes, that's not a fair deal. That's not a good trade. It's like when I'm talking to younger kids, I often say that's like somebody coming up and saying, hey, you have your brand new bike, I'm going to give you $1 for it, and then I'm going to take it. Are you okay with that? No, of course not, right? Would you give them your bike, under any circumstances? Yeah, if they came up and said, I'll give you $5,000 for my bike, sure, I'm going to give it to you, right? But you don't give it to somebody who offers you $5. And that's a good way to help kids think about data sharing. It's not that we don't ever share our data. We absolutely do, but we share it when the value in return, when it's somebody we trust, because obviously we're not going to do a transaction for $5,000 with somebody I don't trust is going to come good. So we have to trust them, and the return on what they're asking our data for. Maybe it's something that I need for my healthcare provider to help me be healthy and safe. Maybe it's something that I need a lot of value because it's helping me prepare for college. But that's the transaction cost that we have to talk about. So those are questions. Those are the sort of 4 questions that I would encourage anybody to ask when talking about an app.
I love that. And of course, we're recording the conversation. I'm sure our colleagues grabbed a screenshot of that, but I also encourage everyone to grab the book, because honestly, Richard, I spent the summer reading. I spent the last 2 years reading, but I spent the summer reading, and one of the books I read was yours, which is How We Got Here Today. And it's been an incredible resource to me as I prepare both for the school year ahead, but also work to define a different relationship with my kids and technology. It seems like there are some resources. I mean, one, you've given us some questions to think about, but there are also some resources that ISTE has been able to present both to families and to educators that have been equally as valuable. And so can you talk a little bit about some of those resources that are available to any of us here today, but perhaps might also be available to educators that we work with that we might want to share that information?
Sure. So we have a bunch of, as a nonprofit organization, we have a bunch of materials that are available for free. I'm actually going to share my screen one more time, just because I think it'll be easier to just show it and try to talk about it. So here's our ISTE site, and a handful of things that I'll share. One is we have something called there we go, ISTE standards. And they're freely available. They're guidelines. They lay out what the skills are that kids, young people need to have in terms of using technology for learning. We also have these set up for a version of these. So we have a version of these for students, teachers, and leaders. And it will show you what they look like. And the cool part is if you go under, digital citizen is one of them, a knowledge constructor. For each of the elements, we have a video that you can actually click and play and see what it looks like in real life. The ISTE standards have been adopted by every state and in many countries around the world. And so you may not even know it, but your kids are probably in a school where at least the state has adopted the ISTE standards. And so using those as a guide can be helpful just to think about what's appropriate skills to be teaching. The other thing that I'll share is actually we have a sort of another organization that's part of the ISTE family called EdSurge. EdSurge does a lot of reporting on a variety of education issues. It's really top quality education news, and it's free, so please take advantage of it. But there's something kind of cool that we have here, which is still a little bit in a beta version, but I'll share it with you, called the Product Index. And when you take a look at the product index, it will let you search and compare a whole bunch of different products. So let's say, language learning, we'll type that. So language learning, it's going to give you a whole bunch of different tools for teaching languages, some that you may know, some you may not have heard of. You can click on any of them. You can see what they do, and you can get a sense of, I'm just going to click on this one. I actually don't know this one, so this is not by any means an endorsement of the product, but it explains a little bit about it, gives you some additional information, and so it helps you as a parent or a teacher expand your thinking a bit about what tools are available. And we also, you can do it, let's say I have somebody who's in sort of 5th grade, so I'm going to look at those, those grade levels. You can filter it down, and just the idea is that we make a lot of decisions on the types of tech that we put in front of kids based on not a whole lot of evidence. So we're trying to increase a bit more evidence behind the decisions of what we put on a kid's device. So this is a tool that hopefully works. By the way, I mentioned that it's a new tool, so try it out. If it's helpful, great. We have a thing at the bottom here that says we're listening right there. Click on that, and if you have thoughts, if you try it, give us some feedback. Tell us what works, what doesn't. We really are listening, and we want to use it to make the tool better.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think, we're all trying to figure out how to navigate this space, both with our own kids and with our students, and by having some hands-on resources and links. That's incredibly helpful. Before we open this up for questions and discussion with the audience, I just want to step back into the book for a quick second. One of the things that you did was offer a framework, a really positive framework, and you've conveyed that positivity through our conversation for preparing our kids to jump into a digital world.
Yeah.
And you have outlined 5 qualities that every young person should develop, really in order to become a contributing participant in their own technology. Can you talk through? Don't give away the whole book because we want everyone to read it. But could you talk through, just at a high level, those 5 qualities? If we were to walk away today, engage with our student, engage with our kid, what should we keep in mind?
Yeah. So there's all these frameworks out there that try to articulate what kids need to know. And when I was working on the book, I was frustrated with a lot of them, in part because, again, you mentioned this, and this has come up several times. They tend to be very negative. They tend to be a list of don'ts. Don't do this. Don't be a jerk. Don't share your password. Don't spend too much time on a device. And that is so problematic, right? One, because it's not compelling to young people to be told what not to do. But forget all that. From a learning standpoint, anytime you have a complex skill, and being an effective digital citizen is a highly complex skill, right? Just like learning to play a sport, like learning to play the piano, you can't learn something like complex skills take practice.
Right.
And you can't practice not doing something. That's the easiest way that I can say it. And so by telling a kid what not to do is not helpful in helping them be the type of digital human we want them to be. And so it's critical on any framework, any guidance that we give, that we are articulating what we want them to do so that they can actually practice that. So now, with that caveat, let me tell you what those the 5 areas are. And we work, by the way, I worked with, probably 20 organizations that work with youth and sort of young people, technology. This was a lot of input on these, and so we have a lot of buy-in. So first one is being balanced, knowing how to balance the different types of digital activities and different physical activities in your life. That's number one. Number two, to be informed. You know how to use technology to help inform you about ideas, things that help make your life more meaningful.
Mhm.
Number three, know how to be inclusive, to create environments, virtual environments that are inclusive of others, and recognize that opposing ideas are actually critical for our learning. Even if we don't change our opinion, even though we don't agree with them, being exposed to them are critical for us to learn. And so therefore we need to recognize that being inclusive isn't something we do just to be nice. It's something that we do because it actually is critical for our own learning and survival. Number four, being engaged, knowing how to use technology to make the community around us a better place, whether that community is our neighborhood, our school, our family. We need to be thinking about these devices that we have in our hands. Kids need to see them as tools to make their communities better places. And finally, number five, being alert. And being alert, and notice I use that term instead of safe, I use the term alert, which I think is a better term. Alert to where we are, who has access to our data, what information we are sharing or not sharing about ourselves. When we're in a place that we shouldn't be, and what's going on around us, right? Those are the five competencies that we talk about, the digital citizenship competencies, and they are a really great framework for helping kids grow up to be healthy in a virtual world.
Super. Thank you for talking through each of the five. I have a couple of follow-up questions on a few of them, but I want to give space and time to our audience, to our participants today. So would love, if you have a question for Richard or a reflection on something that he shared, if you're able to come off screen and introduce yourself and how you engage with learners. Are you a teacher? Are you a parent? Are you a community member? Just give us a sense of that, and feel free to ask your question. I know some of you had some comments and reflections, particularly on being aware of different tools and resources as Richard was talking. So I'll open up the floor. Does anyone have a question or a comment for Richard? It's always tough to be the first one. So
Oh, I'm a longtime teacher though, so silence doesn't bother me.
great.
You need to check a second to think about it. Though I will say, Alison, while people have a minute to think, I do want to just give a heads up about something. ISTE and a group of other organizations, including Los Angeles Unified School District and some others, are going to be hosting an event in October. October is Digital Citizenship Week. You may not know that, but it is Digital Citizenship Week. And so we are hosting an event called DigCit Connect. I'm going to post the website here as a warning. The website just went up. It's sort of the draft version, so we don't have any of the speakers yet or the program up. That's coming soon. But I wanted to at least flag it for you so you're aware of it. It's one day. It's a free event. And so if you're interested in learning more about any of this that we're talking about, how to help young people be healthy digital humans, participants in this space, just throw that date on your calendar, and we'd love to have you there.
I love that. Well, I had one question in this, and maybe it touches a little bit on this event, but when you were talking about, the five qualities, one of the first ones that you discussed was balance. Thinking about the balance between technology use and maybe, physical activity or non-technology engagement. Where do you have examples of experiences where perhaps engaging with technology gave someone like the confidence or help to build their understanding of how to be active without technology? I'm thinking about maybe exposure to a sport or a hobby or some sort of activity that then actually played out in a non-technological engagement.
Yeah. So there's actually a lot there in what you asked, and great, all good things. But let me sort of peel apart a couple things. The first is the framework that we often use, and I talk about this quite a bit in the book. we recognize as parents and teachers, we recognize that there needs to be some boundaries, some healthy boundaries on tech use. And we tend to revert to using a timer, a clock, to set those boundaries. And that is not helpful. It's not helpful, and it's well intentioned. Believe me, I don't mean to be, sort of sounding like I'm criticizing anybody, but it's not helpful, because using a timer, or this idea of screen time, right, sends the message that all activities that happen on this piece of glass with a light behind it are of the same value. And nothing could be farther from the truth. Imagine, if we had, I don't know, I think about like outside time. I don't know, right? And we just said, how much outside time is appropriate? Well, it depends on what the kid's doing. If my kid's out back, chucking rocks at my neighbor's windows, like, that is not good outside time. If my kid is out, riding their bike on a nice day and getting exercise in it with a helmet on, that's great outside time. And so we can't, in the book, I compare it to food time, where we when we have dinner, we don't call it food time and you can just eat, Twinkies for an hour and then be done. No, we teach that different foods have different values, and we need to eat healthy food. And that's what we do. It's not about how long we're eating for, it's about what we're eating. And yes, every once in a while we're gonna have a Twinkie, but it's gonna be mixed in between. And we teach our kids not to stop when the hour, it's not shove as much food as you can into your face until 7:01 and then you stop. No, we teach our kids to recognize, have you had enough? Have you had enough food? Do you feel like you're full? That's when you stop. And that's what we got to do in the digital world as well. And I give lots of examples for that in the book. So we need to be saying, it's not screen time. It's, what is the activity you're doing? Are you doing an activity? Are you doing homework online? Are you talking to a family member online? Are you playing Minecraft? I think Minecraft is a really great creative game. Or are you just literally sitting there and watching hours and hours of videos, or playing Candy Crush, right? Those are very different activities. So that's the first thing, is we have to make that distinction. The second thing, and by the way, I'm going to drop in another link here. This is an article that I wrote for NBC. And often what we do is we find ourselves, it's a series of phrases that parents find themselves saying that I wish I could replace. And myself too, by the way. I've said all of these in here, like, let's just be clear. And so one of the, the phrases that's there is, you're addicted to your phone, or you've been playing that game for too long, or stop sitting around on the computer all day, right? Those are all of the phrases. But what they do is they're phrases that criticize the behavior that is being conducted, and they don't provide the alternative. And so what I often say to parents is, I say, if you get into and we've all done this, stop being on your phone, you've been on your phone too long, right? Right, me too. We've all been there. And so my question is, what would you rather they be doing? Right? And I've had parents who go, I don't know anything, but not that. And I'm like, if that's your answer, then you should probably let them keep staying on their phone. But if you dig a little deeper, sometimes they'll say, look, I just missed them. They haven't engaged with our family for a while. And so I'm like, say that. So often you'll say to your kid, it's not that what you're doing is bad. You're watching a video or you're playing a game online. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but your family misses you. And so can you take a break from your device a bit, because we want some time with you too. And it feels like you're getting a little out of balance. You hear that language? It's about balance, not about time. Here's another example. It may be that there's my kid is doing an activity on their device. Doesn't matter what it is, but they haven't had much physical exercise in the day. And so I might say, hey, this isn't about liking or not liking your activity. I just feel like it's a good day outside. You haven't had much physical activity. Feels like you're getting out of balance there. Can you transition to an activity that gets you some physical exercise? You see that shift? So it's not about saying don't use your phone. It's about saying there are other activities that are equally or more important that are getting short shrifted because you are on a device at the moment. And that sets up a much healthier internal dialogue for them, because then over time, what happens is they start to recognize it for themselves. Yes. Right? They start to say, and I've had this happen to my kids too. Sometimes I walked into my son's room the other day, and he was, had been on it, I don't know what, watching YouTube or something for an extended period of time. And I just said, hey, James, how you feeling about balance right now? And he literally was like, here you go. He just handed me the phone, right? He's like, you got me out of balance. I know. And that's okay. And that was not a healthy amount of time that he spent on technology in that moment. But the point was, he was recognizing that it was out of balance, not because a timer was going off, because he recognized that other important activities in his life were getting short shrifted.
Yes. Or how he felt, just
Or
the
how he
how.
felt, or how he felt. And
Exactly.
that's an important one too. We had a case with my daughter, and look, technology access does not have to be binary, right? It doesn't, it's not on or off all the way. And so with her, we did a thing. She was, it was early on, this is a couple years ago, and she wanted to start access to social media. She was old enough that it was, appropriate to do. And we said, let's do it as a trial period, right? Try it out, and then we're gonna talk about how we feel. And after we did it for a while, we noticed, and we talked to her, we said, how do you feel?
Mhm.
We talked about it, and she, I feel badly. I feel like my life isn't as good as other people's, right? It's very typical that you'll have a teen that will say something like that when they get on social media. And then also, we commented to her, we said, on days where you've spent time on social media, you're not as friendly to the people in our family. You snip at them faster. You're not as, let's take a break. We said, we're not banning you from social media. We're going to take a break for a little bit. And then we're going to come back and try it again and see how we do. And it took us actually a couple shots at it before. And she also got mature, and we had conversations around it. And now she's, on social media, and it seems to be going well. But it took a little while, because we had to have her get more savvy about recognizing how she felt, and knowing that needed to factor into her equation of how much time she was spending on a particular app.
I think there's some great reflections there for our learners, for our kiddos. There are also some great reflections there for each of us, Richard. I mean, I'm taking in what you're saying, even for myself, and perhaps a different way to manage balance in my own life. I know even, over the last 2 years, many of us have spent our days just like this, right? In virtual conversation on a screen. And that has been valuable for making new connections and, starting to seed relationships. But I've also found that this opportunity to get back in person and be together and strengthen and grow those relationships is what really matters. And so creating, yes, some of that space to do a little bit of both, and creating that balance is so important. So I know we're coming upon the end of our time together. I appreciate the engagement in the chat from our audience. I want to ask you one final question as we wrap up. What are you, as you look, I don't want to create a time boundary on this. I was going to say, as you look to a generation of learners who are transitioning perhaps from grade school into the post-secondary or the workforce context, what gives you hope about how they will integrate, use, leverage technology to create more inclusive communities and relationships?
Well, that's a great question, a good way to end. I mean, one of the things that I think is really interesting is that by the very nature of the fact that technology breaks down some of the barriers that we grew up in, right? For us, even though we know we've all been in Zoom now forever, we know that there are ways that technology can break down barriers, but we grew up in a world where physical distance was such a huge barrier to us that it's hard to get us out of that, right? We grew up in a world where language differences were so hard to deal with that it's something that's sort of ingrained in our brains. We have grown up in a world where our physical appearance, gender, looks, right, sort of defined so much of who we were. And now we have kids that are growing up in a world where, one, physical location has so little to do with any impact on their interaction. They don't care I don't care where I am. I don't care what part of the world I am. If I'm a connection and part of their friend group, I'm just as present now as I am with a kid who lives across the street. So that's one thing. Second is this idea of language, right? If you've ever watched kids, especially on tools, on online gaming tools, they're using live translation, either by text or voice to speech. And that's like, yeah, I don't care what language you speak. I don't know. I don't care, but we're going to work through that because we have tools that'll help us do that. And a lot of times you'll notice that physical appearance, you may even not even know what somebody, if you're interacting with somebody who's an avatar, you don't even know what their physical appearance is. And it doesn't matter, because who cares? Because that's not what brings currency. And so they're growing up with some of these frameworks that are very different than the things that have defined our decision making. And I think that's really, really exciting. And I think you'll start to see that will shift into the workplace. We're already starting to see it, right? A much more global workforce. Yeah, some of that is because people like working from home at COVID, but part of that is us realizing that you actually can tap into the best talent for what you need, no matter where they are. And I think you'll start to see a much better use of these sort of global networks as young people get older. We have to throw a flag on the field, though, on something, which is that along with all that great stuff and inclusivity and all that the technology brings, there also is this really very real challenge of, sort of the bubble concept that we talk about. And I talk quite a bit about this in the book, which is that the tools that we use right now, there are very few public tools that enable our engagement with each other in virtual spaces. In physical spaces, that's not true. We have public parks, we have libraries, we have lots of public spaces. In the virtual space, almost all of our public kind of town hall areas are commercially funded. And so, it's much more like maybe a mall would be the equivalent, where in order to engage with somebody else, we have to make it financially worthwhile for the person who's hosting the space. And so along with that comes some tricks and some tools where we're being fed information that is not necessarily helping us think more clearly or understand a topic better, but it is designed to help keep us on a platform and clicking on the ads on the platform for as long as humanly possible. And so I say that not to end on a depressing note, but just to say, in order to take advantage of all of the great sort of engaging, inclusive tools and strategies that the virtual world brings, we have to educate ourselves and our kids to be aware of the tricks and the tools that are being used to actually erode at the very value that those digital spaces provide. And if we can do that, if we can help our kids know to catch them out, to know what's happening in events, to recognize that I'm being fed information that reinforces my bias, we will actually be able, I think, to be in a very good place in how we design technology in the future. If we aren't calling that stuff out, then the very value of digital spaces gets eroded by, frankly, business models that don't have the health of our civil society as their top priority.
Now that's a great thought to end on. Thank you so much. I have added a link to your book in the chat. This is the Amazon link, but what I always encourage our listeners to do is buy a copy from Amazon or whatever whatever national or international network you want, and then go to your local bookstore and pick up a copy, or ask your local bookseller to please put the book on the shelf. So I know sometimes
I'll just reinforce that it is in stores across the country. And so I would encourage you, if you can, buy a book wherever you want, but if you have a local bookstore that you like, go support them, go grab the book from them. It's also available in an audiobook if that's helpful. And so supporting our local bookstores really matters.
Local bookstores, and buy an extra and share it with a friend or a colleague is always my recommendation too. Richard, thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon. Thanks to our audience for jumping in and listening. And I'm really excited to have some really good practices to put in place in my own home and across my own network. So appreciate your time today, and everyone be well.
Thanks, Alison. Thanks for hosting me, and thanks for all of you who spent a lunch hour with us today. Really appreciated the conversation.
Absolutely. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.